You already know what to do. You've done it 100 times, 1,000 times. You see the block floating in the air, that familiar golden question mark glowing against the blue sky, and your thumb moves before your brain does. You jump, you hit it from below. Something comes out. That's how this works. That's how it has always worked. The mushroom slides out and starts moving across the ground. You chase it the way you always chase it, because in this world, mushrooms are good. Mushrooms make you bigger. Mushrooms save you. Except this one is purple. You notice it a half second too late. You touch it anyways, and Mario stops, turns to face you, and falls. That's the whole story of Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels in one moment. A game built on a promise, and a sequel that knew exactly which promise to break first. Join us as we explore the sequel Japan kept, the swapped America never knew about, and the levels that stayed lost for 7 years. On today's trip down Memory Card Lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello, and welcome to the 301st episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video games a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we are looking back at, well, depending on where you're from, it's either Super Mario Brothers 2 or Super Mario Brothers: The Lost Levels, the 1986 Famicom Disk System sequel that Japan embraced, America never received, and the rest of the world wouldn't meet for 7 years. It's a story of a game built for the most demanding players, a decision made in a Seattle office that changed what Mario meant in the West, and the remarkable chain of events that put a completely different game in American living rooms instead. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co host, who I have no doubt has strong opinions about which Super Mario Bros. 2 is the real one, and is absolutely prepared today to defend his answer. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, poison mushroom or magic carpet? Where do you stand?
Magic mushroom.
Oh, that's the best kind.
God damn right it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, can you blame us? Gestures everywhere.
Hey man, honestly, when you were talking about the lost levels, first thing my mind went to was lost lands. So,
Oh, yeah.
clearly I got something on my mind.
Magic mushroom is a good choice. Have you ever played through Lost Levels?
I don't believe that I have.
We had
Um,
All Stars. This came to North America in a classic collection called Super Mario All Stars, and I know we had it. If I'm not mistaken, they bundled it. Not mistaken, as if I didn't research. I actually didn't think to research this, but I believe they bundled it with the Super Nintendo for a while. We ended up having to replace ours, and so we got it in a bundle. And so
I
it's
do
somewhere.
not remember the All Stars of the Super era. The
Mm.
only Mario All Stars I know was I believe that was for Switch, or was it still Wii U?
It
It was
was the Switch
Switch.
3D All Stars.
Yeah, 3D All Stars. That's the one that I played. I know I played a lot of Mario's, but I feel like it was World.
Well, yeah,
Um, I don't
yeah, I
think that
played
I
the heck out of it.
that's yeah, I don't think that I ever played the brothers. like when you and I were playing, and then when I got on my own, I was not really going back and playing games on the Nintendo or the NES or Super. So it would have been Super Mario 64 and on.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
fair.
lost levels may have been lost
Lost to
on
you.
me.
Dumb. Yeah, we're dumb. All right. Well, this is a rather famous topic for video games. This is a story I think a lot of people are going to know, but hopefully somewhere in here there are some things that you may not know. It's pretty common knowledge that there are two different versions of Super Mario Brothers 2, and people often want to know why our Super Mario Brothers 2 is so weird per se. And we're going to answer that for you today. So hang around. But before we get there, Rob, why don't you take some time and share with our listeners some other things that happened during this week in gaming history?
Sure thing. Kicking it off on June 6th, 1993, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening was released for the Game Boy in Japan, developed and published by Nintendo. The fourth entry in the Zelda series and the first to appear on a handheld, it began as an unofficial after hours attempt by Nintendo staff to port A Link to the Past to the Game Boy, and grew into something else entirely. Directed by Takashi Tezuka, who listeners of today's episode will recognize, the game took Link out of Hyrule for the first time, stranding him on the mysterious Koholint Island with no Triforce, no Ganon, and a story unlike anything the series had attempted before. Tezuka wanted the world to feel like Twin Peaks, not the restaurant, the other Twin Peaks. The result
Lord.
sold 4 million copies, topped the Famitsu charts in Japan and the Game Boy sales chart in North America, and is considered one of the greatest handheld games ever made.
Can you imagine, though, if he did want the world to feel like the other Twin Peaks? To be fair, maybe that inspiration is in Mario instead, because there are some, you know, pretty, fantastic mountains and hills in some of those Super Mario World levels.
Dave, I'm going to let you mull over that comment, and we're going to go on to the next one because I don't want to comment on it. So, next, on June 4th, 1994, Stunt Race FX was released for the Super Nintendo in Japan, developed by Nintendo EAD in collaboration with Argonaut Software and published by Nintendo. It was only the second game to use the Super FX chip, the same coprocessor Argonaut had helped develop for Star Fox the previous year, and it pushed the technology in a new direction, rendering fully polygonal, three-dimensional tracks and vehicles on hardware that was never designed for it. Where Star Fox had used the chip for a shooter, Stunt Race FX put it to work in a racing game complete with slopes, ramps, and physics-driven cars that tilted and bounced across the track. It sold over 1 million copies worldwide and remains a fascinating technical artifact of an era when the race toward three-dimensional gaming was still very much being run.
We own this as well. Funny thing, I don't think I ever owned a copy of Star Fox, but I do own a copy of Stunt Race FX, which I think is appropriate if you knew our family growing up.
I mean, yeah, racing.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
really all you have to say.
yeah, we
Um,
had everything racing. We played every racing game.
yeah, that's definitely. I remember having NASCAR, uh, playing that, and it didn't play it to race NASCAR. I played it to like just drive around and have fun, but like had to have NASCAR, had to
We
have it.
did. We did. But we had Stunt Race FX too, and it's all right. It was a interesting technological marvel for its time. We'll just leave it at that.
We'll leave it at that, and we'll move on to the next one, Dave. Because on May 31st, 2005, Advent Rising was released for Xbox, developed by GlyphX Games and published by Majesco Entertainment. It arrived carrying enormous expectations. A science fiction epic with a story scripted by Ender's Game author Orson Scott Card, a sweeping orchestral soundtrack, and plans for a full trilogy. Players assumed the role of Gideon Wyeth, a rookie space pilot drawn into a war between humanity and an alien race determined to wipe it out. Despite the ambition and a large promotional campaign that included cinema advertising, the game's retail performance fell well short of what was needed. By the end of 2005, Majesco had revised its business plan entirely, canceling all planned sequels. The trilogy never materialized. Advent Rising remains one of the more melancholy what ifs of its generation. A game that reached for something genuinely ambitious and didn't quite get there.
This is on my to playlist. I'm very sad it passed me. It has all the makings of something Dave would love, but for whatever reason, I never got around to it. And so I would like to someday, to be honest with you. I read all the time that this is a game slash series that should be like brought back. I see that. I see that often.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely slipped by me as well. But maybe it was for the best because if it was it probably would have if it was good, Dave.
Speaking of something that didn't slip by you,
God damn it, you stole my freaking thing, my transition, Dave. Ah.
yeah,
Yes,
boy,
Dave. On that note, thanks to your great transition that you took from me on June 5th, 2013, State of Decay was released for Xbox 360, developed by Undead Labs and published by Microsoft Studios. Originally conceived under the working title Class 3, it was built as a smaller scale project to lay the groundwork for a larger zombie survival MMO the studio had envisioned. What it became was something more interesting than a stepping stone, an open world survival game that put the emphasis not on action, but on management, resources, morale, relationships, and the permanent consequences of losing people in your care. It sold 250,000 copies in its first 2 days, exceeded 2 million units by the following year, and launched a franchise that has since reached over 10 million players. And damn, is that a good game.
we played through both of them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the second one is one of my favorites.
They
It's one
are
of my
fantastic.
favorite management games. Like zombie survival and management. Obviously, I never would have let one of my people die. I always try to restart. I'm not gonna lie, I have done that once. God damn it, that annoyed me. It made me feel the topic of our next and final entry for this
Oh,
week, David, because on
good
June
one.
1st, 2015, Hatred was released for PC, developed and published by Polish studio Destructive Creations.
I tip my hat to that one.
Thank you. An isometric shooter in which the player assumes the role of a mass killer on what the game called a genocidal crusade, it had generated significant controversy months before its release when its announcement trailer was pulled from Steam Greenlight for its content. Valve later reinstated it, with Gabe Newell personally sending an apology to the developers. The game carried an adults only rating from the ESRB. Critics were largely dismissive, holds a Metacritic of 43, but the conversation it provoked about the limits of content in video games and who gets to draw those lines has outlasted the game itself.
Hatred is one of those interesting situations where the conversation was better than the game itself. It was a lot to do when they pulled it, and to be fair, it put a lot more eyes on that game than the game would have had otherwise. It wouldn't have mattered though. As you could see, it wasn't a fantastic game.
Yeah, that's true. But hey, it's always nice to think.
Yes, indeed.
So with that, Dave, that's it for our week in gaming history. So why don't you take it today with today's topic of gaming history?
Yes, but okay. By the fall of 1985, Super Mario Brothers had done something that nobody at Nintendo had fully anticipated. It didn't just sell, it changed what a video game could mean. It was bundled with the Nintendo Entertainment System here in North America. It became the argument for why that console was worth owning. And then it became something even bigger than that. It sold 40 million copies. It started a franchise. It became the face of Nintendo. The team that had built it was 7 or 8 people working in close quarters, squeezing every last bit out of the Famicom's hardware. They even borrowed 3 extra weeks at the end just to fix bugs and add more blocks. Now, as you know, Shigeru Miyamoto had conceived the game alongside his assistant director Takashi Tezuka, with composer Koji Kondo writing the music. Very famous trilogy of people that basically brought us Super Mario Brothers. What they made had become the best selling video game in history. And now Nintendo needed a sequel. Miyamoto, by then, was overseeing his own division at Nintendo called, as you know, all the Nintendo divisions are R&D, research and development decisions. And Miyamoto was at the helm of R&D 4. And R&D 4 was already deep into something else. They were working on The Legend of Zelda. And so The Legend of Zelda was there demanding Miyamoto's attention. It's a different kind of game, an exploratory adventure, that required pretty much a different part of his imagination entirely. So the sequel for Super Mario Brothers really couldn't wait for Miyamoto. And so the keys of the franchise were handed to Tezuka. Now, at this point, Tezuka is 25 years old, and he comes to the job with a particular sensibility. He was a reader, specifically a reader of fantasy. Tolkien's novels had left a mark on him, Lord of the Rings novels, and what he took from them was not the world building, it was not the mythology. What always stuck with Tezuka was the idea of the arduous journey. This notion that a hero isn't proven by an easy path, but by how much punishment he can absorb and still keep moving. This is Odysseus battered by the gods. This is Frodo ground down by the weight of the ring. The challenge itself is the point. Now, Japanese players, Tezuka understood, had already mastered Super Mario Bros. They had found the warp zones, memorized the enemy patterns, decoded the coin arrangements. The first game had given them everything it had. What they needed now was not more of the same. They needed something harder to chew on from his perspective. Now, this sequel did not start from scratch. It actually started from an arcade cabinet. In 1984, Nintendo had been, since 1984, Nintendo had been running something called the Versus system, which is an arcade platform that was built on the same hardware as the Famicom. And this was designed to convert existing arcade cabinets into new games cheaply and efficiently because you could literally just pop a new cartridge in, so to speak. Rather than building dedicated arcade hardware from the ground up, Nintendo could just take a Famicom game and retool it for a coin operated cabinet and then throw it in front of all these new players who might not even own a home console. I mean, the Famicom was flying off the shelves, but there were people still devoted to arcades at this point. Versus Super Mario Brothers had been the highest earning arcade cabinet of 1985. This is a fact that had not gone unnoticed, and it's a fact that played a quiet role in convincing Nintendo that North American audiences were actually ready for the Nintendo itself. But what you need to know is that the arcade version is not identical to the home release, right? Because if there's anything that we've learned about arcades in our 300, plus journeys together, it's that arcade game design and home console game design are two separate things, right? In an arcade, you want to maximize your games for money. So you want to make them difficult. So people have to keep putting in more money to keep playing to go farther. Whereas the that proposition on a home console does not work, because on a home console you want to design your game so people are engaged for longer periods of time. You don't have to spend money, so you don't have to design games by the same concept. And so for Versus Super Mario Brothers, Nintendo had completely rearranged the levels of the game. They pushed the difficulty higher, and they tuned it for players that were feeding quarters into the machine and expecting to be challenged. Some of those harder redesigned levels were so good that they became the foundation of what Tezuka was now building. He took what the Versus system experiments had started, and he kept going in that same direction, further, harder, more unforgiving. The team was working from the same engine, so they didn't have to do anything there. They had the same assets, working from the same fundamental rule set as the original game. And with this all in place, they just began constructing something that looked familiar but played like a trap. That trap had a tell. It came early. Now, in Super Mario Brothers, very famous opening to the game, probably been seen millions and millions of times, right? There are glowing question blocks scattered across every level. And these question blocks are a promise, right? You hit one and something good comes out. It could be a coin, a mushroom that makes you bigger, a fire flower that gives you power. Players learn that really quickly in the original Super Mario Brothers. By the time everyone sat down with the sequel, that was a reflex, right? You see a block, you hit it, you collect what comes out. And so they hit the block. They sit down with Super Mario Brothers 2 and they hit the block. And a mushroom emerges. But this mushroom looks wrong. Whereas every mushroom in the original game had been bright orange and yellow, this one was purple, sickly, the color of something left out too long. Players chased it anyways, right? Because that's what you did, that's what you were taught to do. And the moment they touched it, Mario stopped, stared out at the screen, and died. Welcome to Super Mario Bros. 2. That was Tezuka's thesis statement delivered in the first minutes of the game. The rules that you learned before will not protect you here. They had wind gusts that could push you into a pit mid jump, warp zones that were celebrated in the original for letting skilled players skip ahead could now send you backwards. There were invisible blocks hidden in the open. In certain sections, they weren't secrets to find. They were literally the only way through. You had to memorize where the invisible blocks were. Tezuka built a game that wasn't just harder for a sequel, it was adversarial to its players. Now, Nintendo's own commercial for the Japanese release makes no attempt to hide this. It shows a player failing a particularly brutal sequence. Mario needs to bounce off of a flying bullet bill to get over a chasm to reach a flagpole. It has incredibly tight timing, and in the commercial, the attempt falls short. So Mario plummets to his death, right? Then he appears at the top of the screen, clinging to a frame. There's a bandage on his forehead, a single tear on his cheek. He looks directly at the viewer and he says, Hedekuso, which translates roughly as you're hopeless. How did I do on that, Mr. Japanese pronunciation guy? Did we do good?
No, Dave, it's hetakuso.
Hetak
Heta, like you're a hater. Hetakuso.
Hetak so.
Hetakuso. It's kuso, but the u is kind of silent. So hetakuso.
Hetak so.
Pretty damn close.
Okay. Still, you're hopeless, no matter if it's botched by an American or not.
Joseph Janitis.
The commercial then cuts to the player. It's a young girl shaking her controller and yelling at the screen.
Fitting.
No translation needed for such an image, right?
Yep.
The package for Super Mario Brothers 2 carries a label that says for super players. That was Tezuka's taunt, so to speak, printed right on the box. And the Japanese audience, to their credit, accepted the challenge. Famitsu named it their number one game the month after release. It's not really surprising. I mean, Super Mario Bros. Is one of the biggest games of all time. Of course, a sequel was just an instant buy for all those people, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
So when Super Mario Bros. 2 came out to Japanese audiences, it sold over 2 million copies on it was released for the disc system, not the base Famicom. And 2 million copies on the FDS is a remarkable number given how modestly the hardware had performed, right? Because it's not the Famicom. It's not the tens of millions of Famicoms that were sold. It's the disc system. It's the add-on. And they did not sell a lot of the add-ons, but they did sell 2 million copies of Super Mario Bros. 2 on the add-on, which is just it's awesome.
Definitely.
So it released, it sold a ton, but even devoted Japanese players found the limits of what Tezuka had built. A strategy guide for the original Super Mario Brothers had been a bestseller in both 1985 and 1986. It actually outsold popular novels and mangas. Did I get that right? It's manga,
Manga.
right?
Yeah.
Yes. Outselling popular novels and manga. I should just leave that in. I just got to admit, I'm bad at pronunciations. We'll make ourselves endearing to the audience. After
Sure.
300 episodes, we better, right?
Yeah.
The strategy guide for the sequel, though, didn't even crack the top 30 the year it came out. I don't know if people didn't need it. I don't know if you know it wasn't as popular. But the game did well. Didn't do as well, but the game did well. Anyway, Super Mario Brothers 2 was released in Japan on June 3rd, 1986. It was brutal. It is beloved. And for many casual players, it is almost impossible. But most importantly, for the sake of our story today, it was never coming to America. Rob, the whole story of The Lost Levels is really a story about a game that never reached its audience. 7 years sitting on a shelf in Japan while the rest of the world had no idea it existed. No distribution, no platform. It was just lost.
Yeah, it's a real shame, Dave, because the game was clearly something special. It just never had a way to get out there.
And that's the thing. Having something great isn't enough. You have to be able to get it in front of people, which is why I'm grateful that starting a podcast doesn't require surviving 7 years in a filing cabinet.
Significantly lower stakes.
Yeah, significantly. And that's largely because I use Zencaster. It's the all in one podcasting platform that makes sure your content actually reaches the people it's meant for. You just log in from your browser, you hit record, and you're instantly capturing studio quality audio and up to 4K video. There is no complicated setup and no lost files.
And what if things go wrong mid recording?
Well, Zencaster's multi-layered backups have you covered. Even if your connection drops, your recordings stay safe and the highest quality. Nothing gets lost.
Unlike a certain Mario sequel.
Yeah, unlike certain Mario sequels. And once you're done recording, Zencaster's post production tools automatically clean up background noise, trim filler words, and balance your audio. Then it distributes your podcast directly to all the major platforms Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you post, all from the same dashboard.
So the opposite of a 7-year delay.
Exactly. If you're interested, go to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code all one word memory card lane, and you can get 30% off the first month of any paid plan. Do not let your content stay lost. Head over to Zencaster, use our code memory card lane, and get 30% off your first month.
And now let's get back to the story. So, Dave, if America wasn't getting the real sequel, what are we getting instead?
Now the story begins. Howard Phillips was the fifth person hired at Nintendo of America. He hadn't come through any traditional path. He started in the warehouse, helping to organize arcade cabinets for delivery and storage. He helped convert radar scope units into Donkey Kong machines during Nintendo's early scramble to establish itself in the American market. Very famous story about Donkey Kong. If you don't know it, go check out our episode on it. But he was in the middle of it. And as Nintendo grew in America and the Nintendo Entertainment System took hold, Phillips' real value became clear. He knew video games. He knew what made them fun, and more importantly, he knew what made them not fun. Minoru Arakawa, the president of Nintendo of America, began relying on him as a filter between Japan and the West. Phillips would play the latest titles coming out of Nintendo's development teams and send his assessments back to Arakawa. A positive review could bring a game to American shores. A negative one could keep it home. When the Japanese Super Mario Bros. 2 landed on his desk, he tore into it expecting something great. I mean, let's be honest, it was the sequel to the biggest video game, period. We would all be excited. What he found, however, stopped him cold in his tracks. As he put it, whereas the original game had been generous, full of secrets to reward the curious, designed to make players feel capable and clever, the sequel seemed designed to humiliate. The poison mushroom, for instance, punished the instincts that the first game had spent hours building. The backwards warp zones turned one of the original's most celebrated features into a cruel joke. I remember when the warp zones were like found, that was like ever like you had to go in the magazine and be like, this is how you get the warp zone. Like finding a secret screen and having the special way of get to it was so cool. And you had to find out by word of mouth, right? It was in a magazine or in not even, I'd say video, but if I say video, y'all are thinking of internet, and it wasn't internet. It was literally like VHS tapes that were like how to be the best player in any, and on the NES. No joke. I think I have that tape.
Wow. That's wow.
I literally how to win at video games. If I'm not mistaken, I have a VHS tape called How to Win at Video Games, and it was a bunch of popular video games, and literally it was like a tips guide. When you're playing, I remember Metal Gear was one of the games. When you're playing Metal Gear, you got to go here and do this in order to beat this like boss. Like it was literally a strategy guide on a VHS tape.
That's pretty cool.
It is actually pretty cool. I wonder if I'm sure someone has it and posted online. I'll have to find it. But it was a celebrated feature. It was something we all talked about. It was something that was cool and exciting, and actually finding it and getting to it for yourself felt like being invited to a super cool club, right? Because it's a secret and you were let in on a secret. But it wasn't a great secret for Super Mario Bros. 2. Phillips would later say not having fun is bad when you're selling fun. And that's such a great statement, isn't it?
Yeah. It
I
is
mean,
pretty good, Dave.
it is so succinct and just appropriate for so many of the stories that we tell here week after week. Not having fun is bad when you're selling fun.
Yeah, that
That's like,
it's a nail on the head.
yeah. He described the experience of playing Super Mario Bros. 2 as stimmying, a game that took a player's confidence away rather than building it up. And so he brought his assessment to Arakawa. The game, as it was not right for America. Isn't it funny that we're here? That, like, we have a reputation for American audiences wanting video games to be easier, and it kind of already starts here in 1985, you know?
I didn't know that was a thing, Dave.
You didn't know that was a thing?
Nope.
No, that's because you like the hard video games, and obviously with the your Dark Souls genre, that idea has changed. But for a long time, and this is where it started, like there was always that notion that American audiences didn't like difficult video games.
Yeah, I had no idea that was a thing. That's kind of crazy to hear.
Arakawa now had to make a call that nobody wanted to make. Nintendo Company Limited in Japan, the parent company, Nintendo proper, was run by Hiroshi Yamauchi, famously demanding, not a man who received bad news about his products easily. He was also, as it happens, Arakawa's father in law. So, on the hunch of a former warehouse worker, right, Arakawa had to pick up the phone and tell the head of Nintendo that the most anticipated sequel to the best selling video game in history wasn't good enough for American players. No transcript of that conversation exists. Nintendo famously doesn't talk about it. They don't talk about a lot of their history from this time period. But we all know what the decision was. The context around that decision matters too, to be fair. This was 1987. Black Monday had just sent the stock market into its worst single day collapse since the Great Depression. The Space Shuttle Challenger disaster the previous winter was still hanging over the country. Americans weren't looking for more adversity in their entertainment. The NES had just spent the previous few years rebuilding public trust in video games after the video game crash of 1983. After that crash had nearly killed the industry entirely. And it had done so largely on the back of one game and one character. And that feeling that picking up a controller should make you feel good, that you should have fun playing a video game. Releasing a Mario game that made players feel hopeless wasn't just a bad product decision. It was a threat to everything that Nintendo of America had built. They needed Mario, just not that one. Now, the answer to Nintendo of America's problem had actually been sitting in a developer's drawer for months. They just didn't know it yet. Well, Tezuka had been building his gauntlet for Japanese players. Shigeru Miyamoto had been quietly working on something else alongside, his work on Zelda. It was an experiment, just a little prototype for a new kind of Mario game, but it was one that was built around vertical scrolling, right? Instead of the screen going from left to right, it was going to go from top to bottom or bottom to top, whichever. So while Super Mario Brothers moved players relentlessly to the right, this new concept would send them upwards, stacking and climbing through levels that extended beyond the top of the screen. And that's an interesting idea. It just didn't work. The hardware, the Famicom, couldn't render it smoothly enough, and more importantly, when Miyamoto played it, it simply wasn't fun. So he just killed it. He didn't throw out everything it had started, though. He handed it off. He handed the concept to a young developer named Kensuke Tanabe, who had joined Nintendo less than a year earlier, and gave him a direction: make something a little bit more Mario like. Tanabe kept the vertical elements but scaled them back, weaving them into more traditional horizontal levels. He added the ability to pick up and throw objects, in this case, vegetables pulled from the ground, enemies hefted above your head and hurled. The prototype was coming together. It was developing its own identity. What it still needed was a world to live in. That world arrived unexpectedly from outside Nintendo entirely. Fuji Television was one of Japan's major broadcast networks, and in the summer of 1987, they were planning an elaborate promotional event called Yume Kojo, Dream Factory. Did I get that one right?
I believe
Yume Kojo.
Yume Kojo. I believe so. Yeah, sounds right.
Yes. Yume Kojo was part technology exposition, part cultural festival, the kind of sprawling summertime event that filled convention halls with live performances, competitions, and demonstrations of what the future might look like. Fuji had commissioned sponsors across Japanese industry to participate, and Fuji also wanted a video game. So they came to Nintendo with a set of characters, the official mascots of the Yume Kojo Festival: an Arabian styled family dressed as if they had stepped out of 1001 Nights. The brief to Tanabe was simple and non negotiable: make a game with these characters. He was 24 years old. He had been at Nintendo for less than a year. He wasn't in a position to argue. What he built around those characters was Yume Kojo Doki Doki Panic. Doki Doki is a Japanese onomatopoeia for a racing heartbeat, basically heart pounding panic. Now, this game followed the Imagine family: a man, his wife, their son, and a young girl. They are pulled into a magical storybook by a monstrous claw, and they have to fight their way through its pages to rescue children who had been kidnapped by a creature who had taken over the world's dream machine. Each family member played differently, with their own strengths and weaknesses. You could clear every level in the game 4 times over, each time with a different character, each time with a different experience. And so the prototype that Miyamoto had killed had found its place. Doki Doki Panic was released in Japan in July of 1987, about a week before the Yume Kojo Festival opened. Famitsu gave it strong marks. Reviewers kept comparing it almost involuntarily to Super Mario Brothers. They were noting something in it that felt like Mario DNA without quite being able to say why. And to be fair, they weren't wrong, right? It had grown from the same soil. Back in Seattle, Arakawa looked at the game and saw something that Nintendo of America desperately needed. The characters weren't Mario, the story wasn't the Mushroom Kingdom, but the feel was right. The jumping, the throwing, the world to world progression. It had the same loose, joyful energy that made the Mario games work. So he made a call. The Imagine family would have to go. Now, reskinning Doki Doki Panic as a Mario game wasn't really as strange as it may sound. Nintendo had honestly done this before, famously done this before. Donkey Kong itself had been built on the bones of a scrapped Popeye game after a licensing deal fell through. Taking a prototype and finding a new identity for it was just something that Nintendo did. It was how Nintendo worked. The Imagine family became Mario, Luigi, Princess Toadstool, and Toad. The storybook became Subcon, a dream world held captive by an evil frog named Wart. The throwing mechanics stayed. The character differences stayed. Luigi still jumped higher but had less traction. The princess could float briefly. Toad was the strongest. The levels stayed largely intact. What changed, though, was the face on the box. Gail Tilden, who oversaw marketing at Nintendo of America during this time period, remembers the decision clearly. It was Arakawa's call, she said, and the reasoning was straightforward. Doki Doki Panic didn't mean anything to anyone. Mario, on the other hand, meant everything. The momentum of the franchise was too valuable to gamble on introducing an entirely new set of characters to an American audience that was still deepening its relationship with the ones it already had. Even those tasked with selling it found it strange at first. Tilden acknowledged that calling it Super Mario Bros. 2 kind of felt odd. It didn't really feel like a sequel to Super Mario Bros. But she understood why the decision had been made. Reinventing the wheel with Doki Doki Panic would have meant starting from zero on education and marketing. Putting Mario's face on it meant stepping into something people already loved. And so the Super Mario Bros. 2 that we know arrived in North America in October of 1988. It was a Mario sequel, so players embraced it. It became the fourth highest selling title on the NES. Nobody outside of Nintendo really knew that it hadn't started as a Mario game at all. The game that Japan called Super Mario Bros. 2, Tezuka's Gauntlet, the Poison Mushroom, the Backwards Warp Zones, the 4 Super Players label, that all remained in Japan, unreleased in the West, and this is pre-internet, so largely unknown outside of the people who had made it. And it would stay that way for years. Western players here wouldn't encounter it until 1993 when it finally crossed the ocean as part of the Super Mario All-Stars collection for the Super Nintendo. It was remastered, given updated graphics, and renamed. Here, they called it Super Mario Bros. The Lost Levels, a nod to what it was. A set of levels that had been made and hidden and pretty much forgotten until the whole strange story was finally too good to keep it a secret any longer. Now, if you don't know Super Mario All Stars, it wasn't just a simple port. Nintendo remade all 4 games on it for the 16-bit Super Nintendo hardware. They updated the graphics and music while leaving the level designs relatively intact. For the Lost Level specifically, they made deliberate concessions. They actually made it easier when they redid it. The poison mushrooms were made easier to distinguish from the safe ones. Checkpoints were added throughout, and extra lives were distributed more generously. The level designs themselves were untouched, but Nintendo was softening the edges, not really changing the game otherwise. One developer on the All Stars team later admitted that he avoided the debugging process for the lost levels entirely because it was simply too hard to play through repeatedly. And so the game that had been deemed too punishing for Western audiences in 1986 arrived in 1993 with its edges softened, and it still managed to overwhelm players who had grown up on the NES version of Super Mario Bros. So critics were divided. Some named The Lost Levels the best game in the collection. Others called it simply an interesting curiosity, a bonus worth experiencing once. Nintendo Magazine kind of described it as just that, an interesting bonus. Edge criticized the difficulty outright. Years later, the original unmodified version would arrive on the Wii Virtual Console. And so it got reviewed again. And here, the IGN reviewer's conclusion was blunt. Nintendo of America had probably made the right call all along. That verdict still gets argued about. It always will, because The Lost Levels is not a bad game. It is a game built for a specific player, one who had mastered every secret of the original, who wanted the floor raised, who understood that Tezuka's cruelty was a form of respect. For that player, for the super players, that label wasn't just a warning, it was an invitation. The West just had to wait 7 years to receive it. If today's episode sent you deeper into the Mario rabbit hole, we've got plenty of ground already covered that connects to the story. Episode 159 tells the full story of Super Mario Bros. Itself, the game that started everything we talked about today, and the small team that built it under impossible constraints. Episode 269 covers Super Mario Bros. 3, the game that came out in Japan the same month that Western players were first getting their hands on our Doki Doki version of Mario 2. And the one many consider the moment Nintendo figured out what a Mario sequel actually should be. And those are good Marios. So if you want a Mario game that went wrong in an entirely different direction than anything we've discussed today, Episode 84 covers Hotel Mario, a cautionary tale about what happens when the wrong people get their hands on the wrong franchise at the wrong time. All of 3 of these episodes and everything else in our archive are waiting for you at www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can listeners find when they head to our site?
You can find a calendar of our episode topics for this year, know what we've talked about and will talk about. You can find a link to our Discord where you can come chat with Dave and I about episode topics or other gaming related topics or any other topics. You can find a link to our Patreon where you can get access to the unedited versions of our podcast. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is Wrong. Each week, we'll tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, a person, a technology, a console. We've covered a few places before as well. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. When we sit down to research new topics each week, we get excited to find new things to share with you. It's a fantastic cycle of learning and teaching, teaching and learning, and in celebration of said cycle, we like to talk about our takeaways each week. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, I learned all about the Lost Levels. No, I definitely have heard of the Lost Levels prior to this. We have mentioned it before on several occasions, even if we never went into the full story behind it. But it is just mind blowing to me that we were viewed as not able to take a challenge. So they're like, "Nah, change the game," and then it people still love the original. Like, I mean, it's just weird to you have to stop and think, what would have changed if we got the original from Japan, and that was it.
I think the build up to Mario 3 maybe wouldn't have been as popular.
You really think that's the case? Maybe people would have been like, "Oh, that one wasn't as good. It was harder, blah blah blah," and
Well,
then 3 would have kind of like,
let's let's look at the concept from a modern standpoint. Okay, because we do have modern examples that we can have this discussion from. Take Dark Souls. You love it, right?
"Yep,
I hate it.
nah, yeah, that's fair."
So you're coming at this from the angle that gamers are going to step up to the challenge. They're going to love the challenge. But if you handed me a brutally difficult Mario, I'm never gonna finish it. I'm not gonna play it. I'm not gonna have fun playing it.
Counter argument:
Sure.
Elden Ring.
But Elden Ring is, to be fair, a watered down version. It's not as hard as the Dark Souls. They literally made it more accessible to casual crowds. And that's a lot of what Super Mario Brothers 3 is. They went back to making it more accessible. It, you're not wrong, but the point is that brutally difficult games don't appeal to the casual gamer. And way more then than now, to be fair, I think gaming is a much more varied hobby now, right? It's much bigger than it was back when. There are games of every flavor, brand, type for everyone, and they're readily accessible. But back then, the industry was in its infancy, right? We're not even 2 decades in. And let's be realistic, 83 is a cutoff point. Like, they lost the public trust, and Nintendo was literally just trying to bring it back. Uh, I think that if you alienate the casual gamer, you alienate your brand. I completely agree with the decision they made.
You might be right, Dave. Maybe it was for the best.
It just
Um,
it would have stopped me in my tracks, and I would have had no fun with it. I mean, to be fair, I've still never finished our Super Mario Brothers 2. I've never felt a need to play it to the end, or the lost levels. I mean, I have all stars. I've never finished either one of them. So I don't know.
oh, it's definitely interesting. I also had no idea that Doki Doki, was that it was kind of a onomatopoeia for racing heartbeat. I've always heard of the Doki Doki Literature Club, and I guess that it's the heart pounding heartbeat literature club. Like,
Yeah, I never thought about that either.
it's learning language. It's something that just hasn't gotten to me yet, and I've definitely heard Doki Doki again, literature club. Anyone that knows, they know. And it's actually kind of interesting. I guess I don't know because I know Coco is heart, so like maybe Doki Doki. It's just like the sound of the like beat, like I don't even know. Like, what do we have in English that's like that? Like, what's the onomatopoeia for a heartbeat? Like, you have da-dong, like, is that? But that doesn't. I don't think that. I'm just trying to make something up. I don't know of one.
That
Do
is
you?
actually
Am I
no,
forgetting one?
no.
So
That
it's kind of interesting to me that like there is a thing for like an onomatopoeia for something like that we just don't have in our language. And it's, again, language is a crazy thing, just as crazy as learning about all these video games. There you go. Said it just as fast as a racing heartbeat. How do you like that one, Dave? So those are my big takeaways for this week. What about yourself?
this story isn't exactly new to me. I mean, if you like I had said in the beginning, it's one of the more famous stories in video game history. Why do we have Super Mario Brothers 2, and why is it so weird compared to the other Marios, right? Because it sticks out like a sore thumb when you put it against any other Mario game. Even Super Mario Land, which doesn't take place in Mushroom Kingdom either, still feels very distinctly like a Mario game. This is just not. Um but I had never really paid attention to its, like, where it came from, the festival, the fact that there was a prototype that was just kind of, a vertical prototype that was made and then handed to Tanabe. I never really knew that. That was an interesting part of the story that was new to me. So it was fun getting to dig into this. And it's fun getting to dig into this. There's literally a book in the boss fight series called Super Mario Brothers 2 that I read for this. And it's like really in depth, about this game and its story, and in depth about the changes to it. And me, I freaking love when people can get this deep into this stuff. One of the things I often talk about that I feel bad about the fact that we've done a weekly format is that I don't get to dig as deep into the topics as I would like to. I do the best I can to do weekly format and keep it in an hour. So it's fun sometimes on a personal note getting to see what people do when they have the time and the, you know, wherewithal to dive super deep into a topic. And there's a fantastic book specifically for this game. So that's my takeaway.
A great one it is, and sounds like for those interested, go check out the book. I know I'm kind of interested myself now. You
Super
hyped it
Mario,
up, Dave.
literally Super Mario Brothers 2. That's that's what it's called. So
Well,
I,
in the show notes, when you know where to find the show notes, people.
that is absolutely true. It is indeed in the show notes. All right, Rob. Well, before I wrap it up, is there anything you'd like to add to today's episode?
I will take a moment. Sorry. I will take one moment to say thank you so much to everyone for listening. It means the world, and we hope that you enjoy getting to learn about the things that to some were lost and to others are now found.
Well done. The story of Super Mario Brothers: The Lost Levels is, in the end, a story about a game that was too much of itself. Tezuka had built exactly what he set out to build, a sequel that assumed mastery, a game that treated the original not as a template to follow, but as a floor to build from. By every measure that mattered in Japan, it worked, right? 2 million copies sold, a Famitsu number one, a generation of players who wore the 4 Super Players label as a badge of honor. But those same qualities that made it beloved in Japan made it radioactive in America. The poison mushroom, the backwards warp zones, the invisible blocks, none of it was a mistake. It was all intentional. Tezuka knew exactly what he was doing, but that was precisely the problem. What Nintendo of America ended up giving Western players instead was something warmer, stranger, and in its own way just as interesting. A game that had never meant to be a Mario game at all, wearing Mario's face, carrying his name, and somehow still pulling it all off. For 7 years, the real Super Mario Bros. 2 stayed on its side of the Pacific. The players who had grown up with the NES had no idea what they had missed, or that what they thought was the sequel wasn't one at all. When the truth finally came out, it only made both games more fascinating. Some secrets, it turns out, are worth keeping, and some are worth finding. Next week, we're trading Mushroom Kingdoms and Magic Carpets for something a little more commercial. In 1994, a small British studio called Bullfrog Productions released a game that handed player the keys to their own amusement park, and then stepped back to watch what happened. Theme Park wasn't just a business simulation, it was a toy box, a chaos engine, a game that rewarded careful planning and then gleefully punished you for it anyway. It would help to establish Bullfrog as one of the most creative studios of the era, a reputation they'd spend the rest of the decade building on. But before we get to the roller coasters, we need to talk again about the studio that built them and the designer who kept finding ways to turn management into something that felt like play. So join us as we explore the rides, the queues, and the surprisingly deep economics of virtual cotton candy. On next week's trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Ugh.
301 episodes? You want me just to leave it there?
Scoop ba ba doo ba ba doo ba ba wa da da.